last Thursday. That was fun being in that group. I wasn't here, but I was able to just sit in the comfort of my own home and join them for an hour. So hello, and it was nice to see you all. And I also want to say hi to any mothers of little ones who might be watching, since we canceled Children's and you guys might be watching online. So hello to you all. May you be blessed today. And all right, so I'll go ahead and start the wrap-up talk. We are doing Matthew chapter 8, lesson 9. And the last time I was up here doing the wrap-up talk, it was September. At that time, we were studying the genealogy of Jesus, and Jesus' ancestry was listed. The Old Testament prophecies were seen to be fulfilled, and we got to meet King Jesus, the promised Messiah. We then moved on to the teachings of the King, and that was the Sermon on the Mount, chapters 5 to 7. We learned that living Jesus' way is different, and it's upside down from the way that the world thinks. Jesus' teachings are a higher calling, loving people more than ourselves. And that's difficult. It's like choosing to swim against the current instead of going with the flow. But our commentary from last week's lesson pointed out this reassuring fact. We build that life one piece at a time. Every time we choose love, it's another board nailed to that house on the rock. If we put his words into practice, if we build our lives on his rock-solid foundation, our house will not fall even in a great storm. So it's a process. If we remember to ask for God's daily bread for that higher calling, we can love God and others more than we did yesterday. The last two verses of chapter 7, where we left off last week, said, "When Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowds were amazed at his teaching, because he taught as one who had authority, and not as their teachers of the law." Well, that's because he really did have authority. Matthew 28:18 tells us that all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to Jesus. And that word authority segues beautifully into chapter 8. The power and authority of Jesus is a theme that runs throughout chapters 8 and 9. Jesus had authority, he taught with authority, but commentator MacArthur suggests if a king has no power, what good are his credentials and principles? This week, we see Jesus go into unclean places and perform miracles with power and authority for people who at the time were considered outcasts, lepers, Gentiles, and women. There are 10 miracles recorded in chapters 8 and 9, and MacArthur refers to these as authenticating miracles. So why does Jesus choose to perform miracles? We know that he shied away from crowds, so that wasn't it. You can put up a slide. Next slide. Oh. I've been heard that I can't be heard in the booth. You can put up the next slide. Okay, there we go. Warren Wiersbe gives 3 reasons that Jesus performed miracles: compassion, proof that he's the Messiah of Israel, and to reveal his saving truth to the people. And a few more themes I noticed kept repeating themselves. There was response to Jesus, impending judgment, and great faith versus little faith. And if you're not normally a commentary reader, I definitely encourage you to check it out this week. There was so much context in there, a lot of cultural stuff that I don't necessarily go into in this talk, because I know it's in the commentary. So definitely read it. Very good context there. And you can go to the next slide. So this wrap-up talk is in 3 parts. Now I need my glasses. Part A, Jesus' power and authority to heal and cleanse. Part B, following Jesus is the most important thing. And part C, what sort of man is this? And your central idea for this week to think about through the week is make a decision to wholeheartedly follow the one whom God sent and to whom he gave authority. And now let's go to the Lord in prayer. Lord, I just want to humble myself before you and all these people here. I don't have much formal training, but you are faithful to provide me with your Spirit, which is the best teacher. Your Spirit illuminates your word time after time. And Lord, you just give me the strength to deliver the words that you've given me, and you are faithful in that. And so, Lord, may I just represent your character well, and may your word bless and inspire all of us today to follow you wholeheartedly. You can go to the next slide. Oh, okay, there it is. Part A, Jesus' power and authority to heal and cleanse. The first miracle recorded in chapter 8 is the healing of the man with leprosy. Warren Wiersbe says leprosy can be seen as an illustration of sin. These verses from Isaiah chapter 1, 5-6 help us to make the connection. Why will you be struck down? Why will you continue to rebel? The whole head is sick, and the whole heart faint. From the sole of the foot even to the head, there is no soundness in it, but bruises and sores and raw wounds. They are not pressed out or bound up or softened with oil. So clearly, rebellion does not lead to life. The wounds are only going to get worse if you don't deal with them. In our lesson, we were taken to Leviticus 14. And being the law that it was for lepers to stay away from society, we have to imagine that this man was positive that Jesus could heal him. To boldly break the law like that, he must have had great faith in Jesus' healing abilities. He knelt before Jesus. You see his response there, kneeling before Jesus. And his request for Jesus to heal him indicated it wasn't a matter of whether Jesus was able to heal, but a matter of whether Jesus was willing to do it. Ask, seek, and knock. The physical gesture of Jesus was so simple. It was just a touch. But that little touch was a big deal. It was shocking in that culture. Our commentary explains it this way. When Jesus touched unclean, diseased, and defiled people, he didn't become unclean. Rather, he drove out the uncleanliness. You can put up the next slide. The healing of the leper fulfilled the prophecy, surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. And let me just pause there and tell you, it's a little bit different the way it's worded when it's quoted in Matthew, and then if you go to Isaiah, the words are slightly different. I don't really have any insight into that, except I think the point is kind of the same if you really look at it. Jesus is the healer. So I'll leave it at that. But anyway, Jesus didn't want people getting too caught up in the miracles, so we're not going to either. While Jesus' healing miracles showed compassion for the sick and established his authority while he was on earth, he had a greater purpose, and his greatest purpose was to take away the curse of sin of the people he loved and to reconcile us to himself. Next slide. Yeah, that's it. So if you keep reading in Isaiah, verse 5 says, "But he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace, and with his wounds we are healed." And that's a little bit of a teaser of what's to come in what we're going to study in Jesus' ministry on earth in the coming weeks. After Jesus had healed the leper, he told him to go to the priest and offer the gift that Moses had commanded. But now that the leper was healed, why would Jesus tell him to go to the priest? Well, not to be healed, but to be cleansed after the healing had happened. And this is one way that Jesus honored the law. So what was that gift that Moses had commanded? Well, there were very specific rules to follow in the cleansing process. A healed leper couldn't just go back into society, and that's why Jesus told the leper in this story to go to the priest. And you'll see that a healed leper had a lot of work to do. If you keep reading on in Leviticus 14, it's actually really fascinating. The cleansing ritual involved 2 birds, hyssop, scarlet yarn, sprinkling the leper with the blood of one of the birds. And then there was bathing, shaving, 7 more days of isolation, and then more shaving and more bathing. After all that, he had to offer a lamb without blemish, grain, and oil. Then there was some very specific dipping and application of blood and oil to the right earlobe, to the left earlobe, to the thumb and the big toe for both the leper and the priest. So you can see how big a deal this was. Those offerings were then offered on the altar to make atonement, and then the leper was finally considered clean. In his commentary, Warren Wiersbe says that just as leprosy is symbolic of sin, the cleansing ritual, the birds, the lamb, the oil, the application of blood, were all representative, and they are a beautiful picture of Christ's work for sinners. The next miracle is the healing of the centurion's servant in Capernaum. The centurion is a commanding officer in the Roman army. He's in command of approximately 100 men. The centurion is a powerful man, and he, like Jesus, is not only powerful, but compassionate towards the lowly, and he wants to see his servant freed from the suffering he's in. Ask, seek, knock. Jesus tells the centurion, I will go and heal him. And the centurion responds that he doesn't deserve to have Jesus come under his roof. Supposedly, Jews couldn't enter a Gentile's home, and your commentary has more about that. Just as with the leper, Jesus is willing to go into an unclean place. But as it happens, he doesn't actually need to go there to do the healing in person. The centurion tells Jesus, just to paraphrase it, you don't want to defile yourself in my Gentile home. You are so powerful. All you have to do is speak the word, and my servant will be healed. I know how that is. Like you, I'm under authority, and I have people under me. When I want them to do something, all I have to do is speak the words, and it's done. So this man knows firsthand what authority is, and he recognizes it in Jesus. Jesus commends the man for his great faith and contrasts him with the sons of the kingdom, the Jews, who are so smug and self-assured in their own self-righteousness. They will face judgment since they do not have the kind of faith that will get them invited into the kingdom of heaven. Instead, they will be thrown into the darkness. There's that common thread of judgment that John the Baptist and Jesus had already spoken of in the previous chapters. And we're going to see that with the demons as well. At that very hour, the servant is healed, just as the centurion had believed it would be done. You can go to the next slide. To introduce us to the next miracle involving Peter's mother-in-law, I'm going to read Ephesians 2:8-9. For by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not your own doing. It is the gift of God, not a result of works, so that none may boast. The healing miracle of Peter's mother-in-law doesn't tell us much about the faith of the one who was healed before the healing. We don't know about her works, we don't know about her service, and we don't know what she thought about this man Jesus with whom her son had recently been associating. But Jesus touched her hand, and the fever left her. Her reaction after being healed tells us about her response to Jesus. She recognized that Jesus had healed her and had saved her from the bad state that she was in. She was grateful to him, and so she decided to get up and serve him. And this is one of my favorite stories in the Bible because it's just so simple, it's so short, it's so to the point. She was saved, and she went and served. The next miracle involves the whole community. There were many who were demon-possessed and sick. They were brought to Jesus, who again, with great authority, healed them with just a word. This concept echoes how God spoke the universe into existence with just his words. You can put up the next slide. There should be one. Yeah, there it is. Hebrews 11:3. By faith we understand that the universe was formed at God's command. So we can see there's great power and authority in the words of Jesus. You can put up the next slide. Okay, so part B, following Jesus is the most important thing. I'm not sure if you can see this, but Suz brought this to my attention. On page 7 of your spiral, there's a nice little breakdown here. We're going to learn that Jesus stops what he's doing and gives time to teach the disciples. And if you can see, I've highlighted the parts where he stops to teach. And it's just interesting because you can see them interwoven in his ministry there. So it must have been pretty important to him. By now, crowds are starting to form. Jesus sees the crowds around him, and he gives orders to the disciples to cross to the other side of Lake Galilee. He knows something that they don't. There will be a dangerous storm and some dangerous people in the near future. Before his followers commit to a future life with Jesus, he wants them to think about and accept what they might need to leave behind. The two men each respond a little differently. One eager scribe, and you can probably picture this man, he's enthusiastic after all the excitement of the miracles, and he comes up to Jesus and says, I'll follow you wherever you go. Jesus replies, kind of like, slow down. Foxes have holes, birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. In other words, life with Jesus isn't going to be easy or comfortable. It doesn't necessarily mean having a roof over your head. Fair warning, considering what happens next in the boat. In contrast, the other man, one of the disciples, rather than being overeager, shows some hesitancy. There could be a few different reasons for this, but here's one possible reason. He wants to honor and respect his father by giving him a burial service. Nothing wrong with that, right? But Jesus says, "Follow me and let the dead bury their own dead." Warren Wiersbe said you could look at it like this: let the spiritually dead bury the physically dead. So Jesus was stressing that the priority here is to preach the gospel and give life to those who are spiritually dead. It reminded me of Matthew 26:11. "The poor you will always have with you, but you will not always have me." Jesus' life on earth was going to be brief, and he wanted the disciples to learn from him while he was physically present with them. Though one man was very enthusiastic and the other hesitated, Jesus' message to them both was essentially, following me takes commitment and self-sacrifice. And I understood this story to illustrate two different ways that people might approach their decisions to follow Jesus, either diving in or hesitating. And it's not so different today. We all come to the decision to follow Jesus with different attitudes. Some dive in head first without counting the cost, and others have a hard time prying themselves from the things of the world, even the things that seem more important. We talked about this in chapter 4 when the first disciples were called away from their boats. We discussed what leaving your family behind might mean. Your family might have a hard time without you, whether you're not there physically, or maybe they're just missing the old you that you left behind at the cross. And just an aside note, in chapter 4, the disciples left their boats to follow Jesus, and now in 8:23, they are getting back in the boat to follow him. They had made a decision to follow the Son of God, the one who could speak miracles with a word. Next, okay, you got it up there. So I couldn't read Matthew 8:18-23 without thinking of this song. I have decided to follow Jesus. I'm not going to sing it, but I am going to read it to you. I have decided to follow Jesus, no turning back, no turning back. Though none go with me, I still will follow, no turning back, no turning back. My cross I'll carry till I see Jesus, no turning back, no turning back. The world behind me, the cross before me, no turning back, no turning back. Jesus wants your whole heart submitted to him. When we decide to follow him, we make a decision to die to our old self. We choose to live by his ways. Fix your gaze on the cross before you, the beautiful promises of God, and not on the things that you've had to sacrifice. You can put up the next slide. What sort of man is this? This is a little bit of a teaser because it's beautiful rendering of the transfiguration, and that's what we're going to see in Matthew 17, and it tells exactly what sort of man this is. So we'll get back to the miracles now. My family likes to go boating and fishing, and my husband's constantly watching the weather radar, so we always know if it's good or bad to go out. And in fact, we just had to postpone our vacation plans last weekend because the weather wasn't going to be good for boating. And so we are very rarely surprised by a storm, and I am very, very thankful for that. But maybe not so in Jesus' day. There were no weather satellites, no cell phones. I'm sure they had other ways of predicting the weather, but the weather on the Sea of Galilee in particular was supposedly hard to predict. And I have heard that it's still to this day hard to predict. Storms often came up without warning. Jesus had just warned the two men that life with him might be different, unpredictable, lacking what the world considers comfort and security. They got in the boat, and it didn't take long to experience the hard truth of that statement. They were caught in a storm and literally fearing for their lives. I think they would have gladly taken a fox's hole over the situation that they were in at this point. Jesus slept as soundly as one could who had complete and total trust in the Father, and I thank Wiersbe for pointing that out. But the disciples were terrified as the waves swept over the boat. They woke him, saying, "Lord, save us, we're going to drown." He replied, "You have little faith. Why are you so afraid?" Does this mean that we shouldn't be afraid of storms? It means that seeking him should be our first reaction to any storm. The disciples had Jesus in the boat with them, yet they were terrified. He had just finished telling them in the Sermon on the Mount that they mustn't worry, and that was actually a command. That their Father, who considers them so much more valuable than the birds and the grass of the field, would so much more take care of them. He even used those words, "O you of little faith," as he encouraged them to first seek his kingdom and his righteousness. It goes against our human nature, our instinct to trust in ourselves, but following Jesus into his upside-down world, leaning on his understanding, brings peace and calm in the storms. We can humble ourselves by letting him be our king and asking and seeking and knocking for what we need. As we see his faithfulness time after time, our faith in him grows. The disciples knew Jesus' power and had him with them, and yet they doubted and feared. Can we relate? I know that I can. In my moments of doubt, I love to be reassured that I can take that right to Jesus by calling out to him, "I believe, help me in my unbelief." That's from Mark 9:24. He knows when we're doubting. We know that we can't hide anything from him, so we might as well confess it and ask him for his help in that area. Jesus rebuked the wind and the waves. They obeyed him, and it was completely calm. The disciples were astonished. "What kind of man is this?" they asked. And I really love this week's commentary for pointing out that the answer to their question, "What kind of man is this?" met them literally on the other side of the lake. The disciples wondered who this man Jesus was who calmed the storm, but the demons knew exactly who he was, and they addressed him as such, Jesus, Son of God. They knew who he was, they knew that he had authority, and they knew that there was going to be a judgment day. Jesus went to another unclean place, a bloody, demon-possessed graveyard occupied by many pigs, and these were all unclean things to Jews. The men whom the demons possessed were so violent that none could pass that way. The demons, like James 2:19 says, shuddered. Demons acknowledge God's sovereignty and impending judgment, but demons are demons because they rebelled and rejected God. It's not good enough to acknowledge who God is. Much of the book of Matthew has been telling us that we must repent and produce fruit in keeping with repentance. The demons know that Jesus is able to drive them out of the men, but they don't want to be around him. They're afraid of Jesus and the judgment that they know that he will deliver at the appointed time, as anyone who walks the broad road of destruction should be. But where would they go? They decide they would rather hide in the bodies of pigs than be in the presence of Jesus. Jesus honors their request, and the pigs drown themselves in the lake and die. The townspeople find out about it, and they want Jesus to leave. And there's probably a lot more to the whole pig thing. We kind of got into it in our core group a little bit today, the clean and the unclean, and I just don't have time to go into it. So it might be something you can research on your own. I'm sure there's a lot to it. But let's talk about the townspeople for a minute. Their way had been blocked by these scary and violent men. Nobody could get around them. Mark's account paints a scary picture. It only tells of one demon-possessed man, but this man was repeatedly bound and chained. He was so strong that nobody could subdue him. He cried out day and night, and he cut himself with stones. After he's been unburdened and unchained, he sits fully dressed and in his right mind. Mark's account tells that the man asked Jesus if he could follow him, but Jesus told him to stay at home and tell of all that Jesus had done for him. And I think this illustrates we are not all called to get in a boat and leave home to follow Jesus. We are called to go where he's asking us to go. Where he leads, we follow. He knows where we're going to be most impactful. That man's presence in the town would be a constant testimony to the power of Jesus, and perhaps the seeds planted there would grow. So the men are freed of demon possession. The screaming has stopped. The way that the men had blocked has now been opened, and that's why they call him the Waymaker, by the way. Yet the people are afraid. Why are they afraid? The town is safer now because of Jesus, as Wiersbe points out. So why would the people beg him to leave? Have you ever been in a city where God was unwelcome? I was in one last month. This was a place where, for the most part, people rejected God, and it was not hard to draw that conclusion. especially when I visited the local bookstore. It was everything just anti-Jesus everywhere. And when I looked for a church to visit, I could not find one that actually preached the truth of the gospel. How could any town reject a sovereign, loving, holy, and merciful God? Our very creation sings his praises and points to him. And in this culture, anyone can learn about Jesus, yet there are still many who oppose him. The town was safer now that the men were healed, but Mark's gospel says they were afraid. And we can imagine that they were angry about losing all those pigs. That might have been their livelihood. But ultimately, they made a choice. Like the demons, like some people today, they just preferred life without Jesus. And when he returns, they will attempt to hide from him. You can put up the next slide. Revelation warns of the judgment of those who remain rebellious and refuse to repent. It should be the one before that. No? All right, I'll just read it from here. Revelation 6:15. They called to the mountains and the rocks, Oh, okay. I don't remember putting it that way, but I guess I did. So the rebellious people called to the mountains and the rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. But we know there's no hiding because Psalm 139:7 says, "Where shall I go from your spirit? Oh, where shall I flee from your presence?" It turns out that you can't. You can put up the next one. Jesus blessed the people in his time on earth with authenticating miracles. In these, they could see his power and authority, and yet also his compassion. Jesus is the lion and the lamb. In the stories, there were people who followed him, and there were people who ran away. The demons and the townspeople were both afraid of Jesus, and they were determined to get away from him. And for their rejection, they will receive a fiery judgment. But for those who went toward Jesus, they received peace and healing. And as the centurion learned, people of great faith will be invited to the feast in the kingdom of heaven. God loved us and sent his son so that we won't perish. His blood covers us, and when he returns, we won't need to hide. In the end of the book of Joshua, Joshua called together the elders of Israel. The Lord spoke through Joshua, reminding them that they did nothing to earn or deserve the promised land that they were about to enter. And here's a beautiful section of what God spoke through Joshua. "I gave you land on which you had not labored, and cities that you had not built, and you dwell in them. You eat the fruit of vineyards and olive orchards that you did not plant. Now therefore, fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity and faithfulness. Put away the gods that your fathers served beyond the river and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. And if it is evil in your eyes to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your fathers served in the region beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." No turning back, no turning back. Jesus, God's only Son, performed miracles with a word. The Bible tells of many miracles: parting seas, escape from slavery, healing and freeing from demons. God gave miracles for the Israelites in Joshua's time, for the people in Jesus' day, and he does them today. Why not make a decision each day to leave your old self behind and follow the one whom God sent, the one who speaks miracles with a word? But we must count the cost. Our decision to follow Jesus doesn't end when we first give our heart to him. There's an everyday surrender in building our house on Jesus' foundation, one board at a time. Each day, we put on the new clothing that he gave us. When we make moment-by-moment decisions that honor him, it may feel like swimming upstream. It may be difficult. But he is faithful, and he will give us the daily bread that we need for fuel. When we put our faith and trust in Jesus and follow him wholeheartedly, life may have some storms, but we can rest in his care and his provision. And so your challenge this week: will you make a decision to wholeheartedly follow the one whom God sent and gave authority? And now let's go to the Lord in prayer. Lord, I thank you and praise you for this morning, and I thank you for your salvation. And Lord, if any have not made that decision to follow you wholeheartedly, I pray that they would make that very important decision today. And for those who have, I pray that you would inspire them, your Spirit would inspire them to surrender daily to love you and others above ourselves. And we pray this, Lord, in your powerful and compassionate name. Amen.